Before they turn 1, I wanted to do a video on my twin pregnancy journey. I know I have shared with you guys some parts of my twin pregnancy, but I haven't really captured what happened from the beginning to the end of my twin pregnancy journey. So I wanted to share that with you guys today. I've been feeling quite nostalgic actually watching them get older. They have started to crawl and pull themselves up on furniture, so time is flying. So I wanted to share some more with you guys about what happened on this crazy journey. It was so wild. So I do have an older child. When he got to about 2, my husband and I started discussing having more children. So the plan was always to maybe have 2 or 3 children, depending on, you know, the position that we were in and how parenthood went for us. So we decided that we would try for a baby, or at least not prevent. I usually have really regular periods. So in the month that I found out that I was pregnant with the twins, my period was late. I think there's only been one other time that my period has been late that hasn't been pregnancy related, and I think it was stress related. So as soon as my period was late, I started thinking that I was probably pregnant. I was also feeling unwell. So I wasn't feeling super sick yet, but I don't know, I just felt a bit off. The feeling of being pregnant is really hard to explain, because it almost feels as though, for me, it almost feels as though my period is coming, but it hasn't come. But then it flipped from that to feeling as though I'm at the beginning of my cycle, so feeling as though my period has just ended. So it's a really strange feeling, but it was a feeling that I had before, so it felt really familiar, and I was like, I definitely am pregnant. I feel as though I'm pregnant. So if you guys have watched my finding out I'm pregnant video, you guys will know that I waited quite a bit of time to test. So I waited, I think it was about a week or 2 after my missed period. So part of the reason why I did that is because I have experienced early pregnancy loss before, and also I was feeling a bit overwhelmed. If I'm honest, I felt a bit overwhelmed, and part of my way of dealing with stress sometimes is avoidance, which is the wrong thing to do, but sometimes I do that. So I kind of felt like until I tested and it was positive, I didn't necessarily have to admit that I was pregnant, even though I kind of knew I was. So I wasn't testing for a while. So when I tested, I was already experiencing a change in smelling my urine, which I also mentioned in my early signs and symptoms video. I can't remember which one, but one of them I also mentioned that. I was experiencing some notable changes in my well-being and how I was feeling. So we agreed that we would go to the supermarket and get a test, and then I tested, and before I could turn the test over, I had planned to you know, dip the stick, turn it over, then wait, leave the room, come back, flip it over. But when I dipped the stick and lifted it up, it was already positive, and I quickly flipped it over, and I thought to myself, oh, well, maybe that was the control line, is what I said to myself, and I left the room. And then I was like pacing up and down outside. Then I went back into the bathroom and I saw that it was positive. So I was really happy, because I definitely didn't want the gap between my first and my second child to be too wide. I wanted to keep it around maybe like 3 years, 4 years. I would have actually tried to keep it to 2, but I found out when I had my first son that motherhood is really hard. So I felt like I needed a bit of time, and also I kind of tasted a bit of freedom after he started to get a bit older. So he started to get a bit older, sleep by himself and things like that, and I was just like, oh, I don't necessarily want to go back to the hardship that is pregnancy. However, we were in the middle of a pandemic, so I hadn't spent that much time out of the house when we decided to try. And if I had known the pandemic was going to last for so long, I probably would have tried a bit sooner. Yeah, so I tested, I found out I was positive. I was really excited, you know, called parents, let them know I'm pregnant, and we waited. I didn't contact my doctor straight away either, because, you know, avoidance and all of that kind of stuff. But I did start to feel really sick. And once I started to feel really sick, I was like, okay, I need to call the doctor, let them know that I'm pregnant, which I did. I was given some medication because my nausea was out of control. I was vomiting, and I was feeling just overall like crap. And I was working from home, but I was having to go into the office once or twice a week, and that journey into the office was just killing me. It was so bad. I felt as though I couldn't cope with it. So I contacted the doctor. Doctor said midwife will be contacting me, and I've got to wait until my 12-week scan to see the midwife, which I don't remember being so long with my first child, but maybe it was. I can't remember 100%. So basically I had to wait like 3 months before I was going to see the midwife. So in between that time, I felt like rubbish. I was sick. I was in bed, vomiting, food aversions, you know, lack of sleep. But in all of that, feeling not my best, I felt 2 kicks. And I called mum and I said to her, Mum, I'm having twins. She was like, no, you're not having twins. You know, it's just a naughty boy. I think that's like a Caribbean superstition. Just a naughty boy, you're not having twins. And I was like, I felt 2 kicks, it's twins. And this was before my 12-week ultrasound. So she was like, no. And I mentioned to my husband a couple of times that I feel so bad. I feel awful. I feel so bad. There must be something wrong, or it must be twins. So he's like, no, maybe you just forgot how difficult it was. And I was like, I haven't forgotten. I can remember, maybe not vividly, but I can remember how it felt, and it didn't feel like this. So in the back of my mind, I was kind of feeling like maybe it's ectopic, or maybe I always think of the worst thing first, which is something I'm trying to get myself out of because it's a really bad habit. But I was like, maybe it's an ectopic pregnancy, not that I know what that feels like, but maybe it is. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm further along than I thought I was, or, you know, maybe something's off. So I was at home, working from home, feeling sick, and within that 3 months, there were a few things that happened. There were a few occasions. So there were a couple of friends' birthdays that I didn't go to, and it was kind of around Christmas time. My cousin got married. She got married at a venue where you could like stay over. So a lot of people stayed over. I didn't stay over because I was just feeling awful. But of course, it was quite early, so I didn't really want to announce it that I was pregnant in case something happened. So I kind of plodded along for 3 months, feeling super sick, feeling as though something was off. In the back of my mind, feeling like, is it twins? Because I feel awful, and kind of just staying at home in bed because I'm working from home and I'm not socializing. So I did that up until 3 months. At my 3-month ultrasound, I got an ultrasound tech who scanned me with my son. So when I got in, he was like, oh yeah, I know, I scanned you like 3 years ago. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. It was really random, I don't know. But anyway, he put the scan on my stomach, and it came up on the screen, and I was like, I knew it. I just knew. I knew. And my husband was like, what? Because he couldn't really understand what was on the screen. So I was like, look, there's 2 sacs. And he was like, oh wow, like that's so cool. And then they called in, I think it was like an assistant ultrasound tech or a trainee ultrasound tech to have a look. And so at that point, I felt really accomplished in myself. I felt really like proud of myself. Like, see, I know me. I know when I'm pregnant with twins. So we left the hospital and we were given an appointment with the midwife. And my first appointment, I was, they let me know that I was going to be under the care of obstetrics as well. I was high risk because I was carrying 2. So I was a bit nervous about that. I felt as though, of course, it would be the best thing to do to be, especially if I was high risk, and I was high risk just because I was carrying twins. So at this point, I'm approaching my 2nd trimester, and I'm still feeling pretty unwell. I'm still in bed for most of the day, every day, and that's starting to kind of get me down because it's also winter time, or at least approaching winter. So that was around like November, December time. It started to get really dark early, and I just felt like I was waking up and it was dark, and I was going to sleep and it was dark, and I was just in the room feeling sick, feeling sorry for myself. So I started to journal, and I started writing down like weekly rundowns of how I felt, or whenever I was feeling down, I started writing things down. I started to try and listen to music a lot, so I fell down video reaction YouTube and I started watching like video reactions and dancing YouTube, and I would play music to myself if I was alone in the house and things like that, to try and keep my mood up. I was really struggling with not being able to help, so I wasn't really helping with the nursery run, and I wasn't able to cook because I felt sick and the smell of cooking was making me feel worse. So I was overall just feeling really crappy, and that kind of lasted until the middle of my second trimester. And saying that, I do have a free download of pregnancy affirmations available for you guys. I will put a link in the description if any of you guys are pregnant at the moment and feel as though you need a bit of an uplift. Maybe you're like me and you're having some periods of feeling not completely at your best. So I will put a link in the description if you're interested in checking that out. And so in between time, the schedule for midwife visits didn't really actually change much in comparison to a singleton pregnancy, and I think I was having maybe 1 or 2 additional visits every few months than I would if I was carrying a singleton. So I was just going to my midwife appointments. We weren't really talking about labour and delivery at that time, more about just making sure that I was comfortable and that the babies were okay. Unfortunately, they weren't able to scan the babies' heartbeats at my midwife appointments, which was really sad. I was really hoping to hear their heartbeats pretty early on, which I didn't get to, because they were saying that when there's 2, it's really hard to kind of differentiate between their heartbeats and your heartbeat, which is really wild that there were 3 heartbeats in me. Sometimes I think about it, it's like magic. Genuinely, it's so amazing. So they were saying that they couldn't do that. They would have to do an ultrasound scan and actually like see the heartbeat and then turn the volume up in order for me to hear that. I think it was around maybe 29 weeks that during the midwife appointment, the midwife said, oh, okay, let me attempt to try and find both of their heartbeats, and she was able to do it. So it was like music to my ears. I was so happy to hear. I spent a lot of the pregnancy having not heard them. It wasn't that it didn't feel real, but I just wanted something to attach them to, and hearing them really helped me with that. But as I mentioned, I was experiencing some movement really early on, and so I did start feeling, you know, what they describe as quickening, or, you know, like swiping is how I describe it, inside my stomach pretty early on. I think by the time I got to 20 weeks, 21 weeks, around then, I was feeling them pretty well. So all whilst I was pregnant, I was doing research about the best way to deliver twins, the safest way to deliver twins. I was watching videos on YouTube about twin mums, you know, their pregnancy, and I spent a lot of time doing that just because I was in bed. I didn't really have much else to do. I was working, but I spent a lot of time, you know, if I had a meeting, I'd flip my legs over the side of the bed, sit up, take the meeting, and then put my legs back in and lie back down. So I had decided that I wanted to try and give birth vaginally, and so I started having those conversations with my midwife. My midwife said, oh, you know, well, that's really up to the obstetrician and is dependent on a lot of things. And I don't think at that time I realized how much had to be right in order for vaginal delivery to be encouraged, at least here in the UK. So I know it's different everywhere. That's what I've learned. Some of the things I was watching were saying, you know, you're going to have to give birth in theatre. Others were saying that if both babies were not head down, you weren't not even going to be allowed to try to give birth vaginally. So I was really hell-bent on giving birth naturally, and I wanted to try it without the epidural as well. And a lot of things I was reading was also saying that you at a minimum should have the epidural. But I had given birth to my oldest son in a birthing centre with just gas in there, and I felt really confident maybe not super confident, but you know, confident enough that I was able to do it. When I first heard that I was pregnant with twins, I was just like, okay, fine, I'll have a cesarean. And then as time started moving along, I was kind of like, well, I actually think I could give birth to them vaginally. So I wanted to do that. I didn't want to give birth in a theatre, and that was my main focus. Outside of feeling unwell, I tried to just focus my mind on, okay, how can I make sure I've got a healthy pregnancy so that I can try and give birth vaginally. So at some point during my second trimester, I did start going to the gym, and the looks at people from the gym was actually hilarious, because I think I was the only person in there that was visibly pregnant. There may have been other pregnant women, but none of them were showing as much as me. So I do tend to run quite a lot. I would say maybe about 7 years ago I started running, so I tried to just keep running. After I started to feel a bit better and the sickness started to subside a bit, I thought I would just keep going to the gym, keep trying to run, and I was able to keep on running. My babies did feel pretty low down. There was a time in my second trimester where I actually felt as though they were gonna fall out. And I remember calling my friends like, I don't know what is going on, but they are so loud down. I feel like if I cough, they're gonna come out. And I remember the lower part of my stomach being really sensitive, you know, not being able to wear underwear that fell on the lower part of my stomach, and wearing lots of things that kind of was either really high-waisted or fell over the higher part of my stomach. But I did research and I spoke to my midwife, and they kind of said if you were doing it, anything you were doing before pregnancy, you can keep going afterwards. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I was running before, I'm going to keep running. I did have some slight concerns about tripping. I didn't want to fall over, so I wasn't doing any running outside. I was running inside and running pretty slow. I did have general shortness of breath through like the whole of my pregnancy from the time I found out I was pregnant, so that did kind of affect my speed. But I was not running to get fitter or to lose weight or any of those things. It was just really for my mental health. I just decided that, okay, if I'm not going to go anywhere, then I need to at least go to the gym when I can to get the endorphins. And it was also during a time where COVID, so some of the gyms had started to open up, but there was a time where they closed again whilst I was pregnant here. So I wasn't able to go to the gym then. And then they had restrictions about, you know, keeping your distance and all that kind of stuff. And being pregnant with twins, I was high risk. I didn't want to catch COVID. So that was also what was keeping me in the house. Like, I didn't want to fall sick with COVID. And there were lots of headlines about COVID inducing labor and putting you in early labor. And I really didn't want that with the twins. I didn't want, if I could avoid it, for them to be preemies. I had concerns about leaving them in the hospital and who would be able to visit and how often we'd be able to visit with the COVID restrictions. So all of those kind of thoughts were really keeping me away from outside. But I felt like if I was going to take any risk on anything, it would be to at least go to the gym and get some endorphins and do a bit of working out, break a little bit of a sweat, and then come home and get back in bed. So I did that for a couple of weeks, and for a few weeks I think I was able to go a couple of times a week, which I was actually really happy with. I did end up buying like a pregnancy belt, so a band to support my back and to start to hold up my stomach Towards the end of the second trimester, I did start to feel heavy in my stomach, and that was starting to hurt my back. So I was having some problems sleeping. I probably should have bought one sooner, but I did eventually buy a body pillow. I did buy a body pillow with my first pregnancy and I just didn't use it. So I still had it, but it was rubbish. So I didn't want to use it again, but that also put me off wanting to buy another one, because I was kind of like, what's the point if they're rubbish? But I was reading reviews on Amazon and stuff, and I found a bigger one that was kind of shaped in a U. So the one I had in my first pregnancy was more of like a half U. It was shaped more like a P. But the one I bought from Amazon was a big U like this. And that was one of the best things I purchased throughout my whole pregnancy. I still use it now. Probably need to get rid of it, but I still use it now. It felt like I was sleeping on a cloud. I was having quite a bit of hip pain. So it was really easing the hip pain and not being able to sleep on my stomach. I had to keep flipping every night to take the pressure off each hip, but having the body pillow really helped me. So that was kind of like a peak. I remember feeling really happy with the body pillow and starting to get a bit better quality sleep. By the time I got into my third trimester, I wasn't actually as big as I expected to be. Like, my bump wasn't as big as I anticipated. It was a reasonable size. I didn't feel unhappy with the size of it. I just felt a bit sluggish. We started to move out of winter, which I think was helping me and my mood, with the days being a bit longer, but I was still a bit down because outside started to open up a bit. But I just felt, because I felt sick still, I felt as though I couldn't really go outside to enjoy it because, you know, I felt a bit unwell, and also COVID. And during the COVID period, we unfortunately had a really close family loss. So I was just feeling a bit down about that as well. So it was just a bit of a difficult time for me. And I tried to just focus on the fact that we had been blessed with twins, that we were going to have the twins were going to be healthy. I'm telling you, the amount of mental coaching I had to do for myself, like, come on, you'll be okay. Babies are going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. But I felt like I didn't want to get into a slump, because I know that if I get into a slump whilst I'm pregnant, then I'm just going to get into a worse slump once the baby comes. I did decide that I wanted a baby shower, because at that point I hadn't seen my friends and some of my family for a year and a half, 2 years. And I was inside a lot, so I felt like maybe I should just have a baby shower so that I can see everyone. We arranged to have the baby shower outside to kind of mitigate any risks of us being inside a closed area and lots of people, and we did limit the numbers. So that was really nice. I was able to see everybody and spend time with some of the people that I really love and care about. So that raised my mood as well, and I started to get a bit excited about the twins coming. At that point, both twins were head down, I believe, or at least facing that way. So I was kind of just like, if they stay in this position, that's fine. I'm going to try vaginally. Midwife had said it's up to the obstetrician, but it's not impossible. It's definitely something that they would consider if I tell them how much I want to do it. So that was the plan. And then I went to my first obstetrics appointment. I think it was around 28 weeks. And I'd spoken to them and explained to them what I wanted, and they said, all things being well, that's absolutely fine. And I was like, cool, I'm going to try and give birth vaginally. I don't want to be in a theatre. I don't want loads of people in the room. You know, I want it to be as relaxed and as calming as I can have it. I don't want to be observed too much, because it worked for me the first time, was my thinking. So I couldn't see a reason why it wasn't going to work for me this time. So between that time, having that conversation with the doctor, and I would say 37 weeks, twin A flipped. So he was bum first. And I can't remember at what exact week they let me know that, but I do remember feeling pretty down about that again. So I started to feel a bit like, oh, I really want him to flip. I was doing research about trying to get him to flip, and essentially the message was, if you've got twins, there's not really much you can do. So the beginning of my third trimester was pretty non-eventful. I was pretty much in bed, not really doing much, trying my best to get up and get out where I could, as safely as I could, but also trying to prepare for the babies to come. So we started to do research about, you know, the best cot solutions and the best pram solutions and things like that. So around, I would say maybe 32 weeks, that is where my focus started to go, which I think was actually a nice distraction, because I do like to shop. So it was quite a nice thing to be able to see all the baby stuff, and it is all very expensive, but we were also looking to change our car, to get a bigger car so that we could fit everybody in it. And so I started to get a bit more distracted with those kind of things, and actually started to enjoy, you know, the experience a bit. I started to try to do things to enjoy the moment without the twins being here. So, you know, with just me, my husband and my son, trying to take in those moments with just him before the 2 additional babies arrived. So at 37 weeks, twin A was still bum first. I bought myself a bag because I was feeling like I deserved it, and I was feeling a bit down, and I was online, and there was the launch of the Fendace collection. I was like, I'm going to buy myself a handbag. So I bought myself the handbag, and I thought I'd show it to you guys, because I wasn't sure of how many people would be doing reviews, and I was just really excited to have it. So I did a video, and during that video I noticed that my eye was moving funny. I filmed some of the video, I watched it back to make sure that everything was clear, and then I messaged my mum a video, and I was like, my face is so dodgy. I sent it to my brother. I was like, look at my face, what's happening with my face? And they were all laughing. I was like, well, maybe it's an infection, because that day I'd got in the shower and I had washed my face with my husband's face wash. I felt as though it had got a bit in my eye. So I was like, maybe it got a bit in my eye, maybe it's a bit infected. I don't usually use my husband's face wash. I was just desperate and couldn't be bothered to go into my bathroom, so I used his. But then I decided that I would continue to film the video anyway, because I was ready. And then I think it was that day or the day after, we had a midwife appointment. But in between time, I started Googling, which is a bad idea, but I started Googling my symptoms, and Bell's palsy came up. And I went into the front room and I said to my husband, I've been doing research and it says that I might have Bell's palsy. And he was like, no, don't worry about it, it's fine. I'm sure if you get some rest, everything will be okay. It's probably the face wash. We're going to see the midwife tomorrow, so let's just wait until we see the midwife and then we can speak to them about it. So we went to, I think it was a midwifery or obstetrics appointment. We went, they checked me, and then I mentioned like my eye is funny and I feel as though my speech is a bit affected, and she was like, have you been to A&E? And I was like, no, why would we go to A&E? She's like, oh, because you know it could be symptoms of a stroke, you should go to A&E right now. So we ended up going to the urgent care that was downstairs, and they sent us to A&E. And the short story is that I was in A&E for about 13 hours. I got there in the afternoon and didn't leave until about 4 a.m. in the morning. I was experiencing some contractions whilst I was there, which I let them know. It was also really, really busy. And of course, we're still in the midst of a pandemic. So I was really nervous about being in a hospital full of sick people, pregnant with twins, 37 weeks pregnant, experiencing contractions and alone. At the end of it, they let me know that I had Bell's palsy, and they gave me steroids, a course of steroids. They let me know that it should go away, but also there's no guarantee that it would go away. So at that point, I would say my stress levels were pretty high. But I did decide, and I think I shared it with you guys, that I was going to try and be even more attentional about not being stressed. So I kind of came home and decided that if my face never went back to the way it was before, then that would just be my portion. It would just be what God has for me, and I would just deal with it in the best way I could. So I tried to put it off, but I was experiencing some contractions, and we did have a few scares, I guess you would say, where I felt like I was contracting. And I would say between week 35 and between week 38, I did go into hospital twice because I felt as though I might be in labor. Whenever I called, they did say, oh, you know, how many contractions have you been having? I explained it to them, and the general answer was just to come in and check. I think it was because I was high risk and because I had multiples, they just felt as though it was better to be safe than sorry. So I did go in a couple of times, which wasn't so bad. The experience in the hospital wasn't too bad. They were nice, and I didn't have to wait around for too long, I think because I had multiples. But that was nothing like my experience in A&E. I think the day I was in there, they were really short staffed. They only had about 6 doctors, and there were like 300 and something people that needed to be seen. And so in between that time and 38 weeks, I was just feeling really heavy. I wasn't able to do much. I needed help getting out of the shower. I needed help getting in the shower. I needed help washing. I needed help getting out of bed. I needed help doing up my shoelaces. I pretty much needed help with everything at this point, and I was super ready for them to come because I had had enough. And at that point, I started to feel like maybe I should just schedule a C-section. For that week, I kept going back and forth, like I feel really uncomfortable, I just want them out. But then the other side of me was like, no, just wait. I definitely wasn't going to be pregnant much past 38 weeks, and that was a conversation that the obstetrician had with me, that, you know, they weren't happy for me to go much further past, I think it was 38 weeks and 4 days. So I just kept telling myself, you know, next month I will not be pregnant. So just wait. And one day in my 38th week, I was in bed and I woke up wanting to go to the toilet, went to the toilet and heard a pop. And then there was water gushing everywhere. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So I had to wake my husband up, and then I had to call my family over to come and get my son. And we made our way to the hospital after, you know, calling the midwife. So we go to the hospital and I let them know that I was expecting twins and that my waters had broke. And then the question came about the position of the babies. So unfortunately, baby A was still bum first. We did have a bit of uncertainty about his actual position, which I discussed in my labour and delivery story, which I will link up here for you guys. But ultimately, they double checked, they triple checked and let me know that he was bum first. And so they would recommend having a C-section. And so I have seen that some women do give birth to a breech twin, but it definitely was something that I was not going to do for a few reasons, but one of those reasons being that my nerves just could not take it. I did shed a little bit of a tear about it. I've never had an operation before, never had any surgery, so it was super scary. I actually really wanted my mum but yeah, I was able to get through it, and this actual cesarean experience wasn't actually that bad. I will say that especially if you're based in the UK and you are okay with maybe not having an epidural and you are pregnant with a singleton, that guys, try out the birthing centre. My birthing centre experience was so good. It was so good. By comparison, in terms of, you know, the facilities that were available for me and things like that, the cesarean experience paled in comparison. I gave birth, I was put on a ward that had other women on there and their partners or their loved ones with them. I think there was like a group of 8 of us. When I gave birth to my singleton in the birthing centre, I gave birth in a huge room alone, and then I got put in what was like a hotel room, which was in the birthing centre with my husband, and we stayed there. We had our own room. We did have to share the bathroom, but it was a really, really nice experience, and we went home the next day. This time round, you know, it is surgery, so I do understand why I had to stay in the hospital. I think I was in there for 2 days, which isn't super long actually, I think, for a cesarean. Everything was okay, but my husband had to sleep in a chair beside me, and it was pretty noisy with all the other mums who had just delivered in the ward too. So I would definitely recommend a birthing centre if that is something that any of you guys are considering. But I actually gave birth to my sons the day before my oldest son's birthday, so I was really hell-bent on like not giving birth to them all on the same day. I really wanted him to have his own day. I was able to hold out until I think my waters broke around 2 a.m. on the day after my son's birthday. I delivered. My C-section was pretty straightforward, was pretty uneventful. I did feel a bit nauseous after the delivery, and I did have a bit of an experience adjusting after I got home, but I do go through all of that in some of my postpartum updates that I will link in the description as well. So overall, my experience was actually, although super stressful as I explained, really positive, I would say. It doesn't sound like it was positive, but I do know the potential that twin pregnancy has to have its complications, and I'm grateful that mine didn't really have any. Aside from developing Bell's palsy, I gave birth to my sons weighing, one was 6 pounds 5 and the other was 6 pounds 2. I was able to take them home with me when I left the hospital 2 days after giving birth, and they were healthy. I forgot to mention that I found out that I was pregnant with 2 boys shortly after my gender scan. That was at 21 weeks. It was actually my first choice. I actually did want to have 2 boys. I wanted my son to have 2 brothers. So I was super excited that I was pregnant with 2 boys. I'm not sure if I thought that through enough, because most people that I talk to want one of each, like a boy and a girl, and that probably would have been helpful for us, because now I feel like they kind of need a sister, but that is a completely different story for a completely different day in a few years. It was difficult, but I was definitely able to kind of work my coping mechanism muscle and figure out ways to deal with stressful situations and things I can't control a bit more. So I was definitely able to develop some skills, some coping mechanisms and some skills throughout my pregnancy. I will do another update for you guys as the twins turn 1. I'm so excited and time has flown and they're doing so well, so I will be sharing that with you guys. So if you're interested in content like this, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long one so thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.